What kind of man stops in the rain for a child he doesn't know, when the entire city has already decided not to care? The night had settled heavy over the street, the kind of cold, wet darkness that clung to skin and turned neon lights into blurred streaks across black pavement, and Vincent Hale stepped out of his SUV like a man untouched by any of it. His tailored gray coat falling perfectly into place, his polished shoes meeting the ground without hesitation, every movement controlled, measured, untouchable, until something small disrupted the rhythm. A tug, barely there, yet impossible to ignore, and when he looked down, he saw her. Amara Brooks, 7 years old, soaked to the bone, curls pressed against her forehead, her tiny fingers clutching the fabric of his coat as if it were the only solid thing left in a collapsing world. Her chest rising too fast, her eyes wide, not with panic, but with something far heavier, something that didn't belong to a child. "Please," she said, her voice trembling but refusing to break. "They're beating my mama." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed, sharp and quiet, cutting through the low hum of engines and distant traffic, freezing not just Vincent, but the men behind him, trained, disciplined, dangerous men who now stood still because their boss had stopped for a reason none of them could understand. Vincent's gaze lingered on her for exactly 1 second too long, long enough to register the details his mind was trained to catalog. Cheap sneakers worn thin at the edges, a jacket too big for her frame, the smell of rain and city grit, but not long enough yet to care because men like Vincent Hale did not get involved in moments like this, not because they lacked the power, but because they had too much of it to waste on things that didn't serve a purpose, and this, at first glance, looked like nothing more than another broken story from a part of the city he had long since learned to move around, not through. "Call it in," he said quietly to one of his men, his voice smooth, detached, already turning away as if the decision had been made, as if the world could return to its natural order, but Amara didn't let go. Her grip tightened, small fingers digging into expensive fabric, anchoring him in place with a strength that didn't match her size. "They won't come," she said, and something in the way she said it, not loud, not dramatic, just certain, made the air shift in a way Vincent couldn't immediately explain. He paused, not turning back yet, but not walking forward either, caught in that thin space between indifference and interruption, while somewhere beyond the alley behind them, a sound rose. Dull, heavy, not a scream, not a shout, just something wrong enough to be noticed and ignored at the same time. Amara's voice came again, softer now, but steadier. "She told me to run," she whispered, her fingers still locked onto him. "But I came back." And for the first time that night, Vincent Hale didn't move at all. How many times does a man like Vincent Hale walk away before he forgets what stopping even feels like? The question didn't arrive as words, not yet, but it hovered somewhere beneath the surface as he stood there in the rain, caught between motion and stillness, between the world he controlled and the one he had trained himself to ignore, while Amara Brooks remained anchored to him like gravity had chosen sides for once. His man stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to keep it private. "Boss, we can have patrol pick this up. No need for you to get involved." The sentence was clean, efficient, the kind of solution Vincent had built his entire empire on: distance, delegation, detachment, and for a moment it almost worked. Vincent gave a slight nod, the kind that usually ended conversations and decided outcomes worth millions, sometimes more, and his hand moved just enough to free his coat from the small grip holding it in place. But Amara didn't release him, not even an inch. Her fingers tightened, knuckles pale against the dark fabric, as if letting go would mean something far worse than whatever waited in that alley behind them. "They won't come," she repeated, and this time Vincent actually looked at her. Not a glance, not an assessment, but a pause long enough to notice the way her lips pressed together after she spoke, like she had learned not to say more than necessary, like she had already tried every other option before ending up here, in front of a man she shouldn't even know existed. Vincent's jaw shifted slightly, a subtle movement that only those closest to him would recognize as hesitation, and that alone was enough to make the air around them feel different. He had built a life where hesitation was a liability, where second thoughts cost power, and yet here he was, standing in the middle of a rain-soaked street, delayed by a child who didn't belong in his world. Somewhere in the distance, a car passed, tires slicing through puddles, headlights briefly illuminating the entrance of the alley Amara had come from, revealing peeling paint, rusted fire escapes, and shadows that seemed to swallow sound instead of carrying it. Vincent followed her gaze without meaning to, his eyes narrowing just slightly, not out of fear but calculation, always calculation, as if even now he could categorize this moment, reduce it to something manageable, something that fit into the logic he trusted. "Where?" he asked finally, the word quiet, almost reluctant, as if giving it voice meant committing to something he hadn't yet agreed to. Amara didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced back toward the alley, then up at him again, searching his face in a way that felt too deliberate for someone her age, as if she wasn't just asking for help, but deciding whether he was worth asking at all. "You're him?" she said softly, not a question, not quite a statement either, more like recognition settling into place. Vincent stilled, a flicker of something sharper crossing his expression, something that had nothing to do with the rain or the street or the situation in front of him. Most people who recognized him did so with fear or ambition or calculation of their own. But Amara's voice carried none of that, just certainty. And something else, something that felt dangerously close to expectation. Behind him, one of his men shifted, uneasy now, because this was no longer just a random interruption. This was something else, something that didn't follow the rules they understood. Vincent exhaled slowly, the breath controlled, measured but not as steady as it should have been, and for the first time that night he didn't try to walk away. Instead, he turned his body slightly toward the alley, not fully committed, not yet, but enough that the decision was already beginning to form, whether he wanted it to or not. What kind of silence is louder than a scream? The kind people hear and ignore, or the kind that makes a powerful man stop breathing for just a second too long? Vincent Hale didn't answer that question, not out loud, but his body betrayed him in the smallest ways as he stood at the mouth of the alley, rain tracing slow lines down the sharp angles of his face while Amara Brooks remained at his side, her hand still clutching his coat like it was the only promise she had left. He didn't like alleys. Not because of danger was predictable, but because of what they represented. Places where things happened without witnesses, where decisions were made that never made it into reports, where the city quietly decided who mattered and who didn't. And Vincent had built his empire on understanding that distinction. "Stay here," one of his men murmured behind him, already stepping forward as if to take control, but Vincent lifted a hand, just slightly, and the movement was enough to stop everything again. He didn't explain. He never did. Instead, he stepped forward himself, shoes pressing into shallow puddles that reflected broken light from a flickering street lamp overhead. Each step carrying him deeper into a space that felt disconnected from the world he owned. The air changed first, damp, stale, heavy with something unspoken. Then came the sound again. Not sharp, not explosive, just wrong, like something being pushed too far without resistance. Vincent's jaw tightened, and for a moment, he almost convinced himself it was nothing. A misunderstanding. A situation that would resolve itself the moment someone with authority stepped in. But authority was already here, and it hadn't resolved anything yet. Behind him, Amara didn't follow. She stood at the edge of the alley, small and still, watching him with those wide, unblinking eyes, as if this was the moment that mattered more than anything else that had happened tonight, more than the rain, more than the fear, more than whatever waited ahead. "You don't have to go all the way," she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough to reach him without echoing. Vincent paused mid-step, not turning around, but not moving forward either. It was a strange thing, to be given permission to stop by someone who had every reason to demand more. Most people wanted something from him. Money, protection, power. They asked, they pushed, they negotiated. But Amara wasn't asking anymore. She had already done that. Now she was watching, waiting to see what kind of man he actually was when no one was forcing him to choose. Vincent exhaled slowly, the breath visible in the cold air, and for a fraction of a second, something unfamiliar pressed against the edges of his composure. Not fear, not hesitation, but something closer to recognition, like a memory trying to surface without permission. He didn't like that feeling. He didn't trust it. So he did what he always did when something didn't fit into his system. He moved through it. One more step. Then another. The alley narrowed, the walls closing in just enough to make the space feel intentional, like it had been designed to keep things contained, hidden from the clean lines and controlled environments Vincent preferred. Somewhere ahead, a door hung slightly open, light spilling out in uneven pulses, and Vincent's eyes fixed on it immediately, focus sharpening, instincts aligning, because whatever this was, it wasn't random anymore. It was specific, contained, and dangerously close to something he could no longer dismiss as someone else's problem. Behind him, the street felt farther away than it should have. And for the first time that night, Vincent Hale realized he had already crossed a line he hadn't meant to approach. What happens when the door between indifference and responsibility is already open, and all you have to do is step through? Vincent Hale didn't slow down as he approached the flickering doorway at the end of the alley, but something inside him had already shifted, subtle and uninvited, like a crack forming beneath a surface that had never been tested this way before, and as the uneven light spilled across his polished shoes, distorting their reflection in shallow puddles, he reached the threshold and stopped. Not out of fear, but out of instinct, the kind that had kept him alive, powerful, untouchable for years, the kind that told him this moment wasn't like the others he had walked away from. The door itself was barely hanging on its hinges, paint peeling, edges worn down by time and neglect, and beyond it, the space inside felt smaller than it should have, the light dim and unstable, casting long shadows that shifted with every subtle movement, making it difficult to tell where one shape ended and another began. But what Vincent noticed first wasn't the space. It was the stillness, the kind that follows something already set in motion, the kind that doesn't announce itself but lingers in the air like a held breath. He didn't step in right away. Instead, he listened, not for noise but for intention, for the rhythm beneath the surface that most people ignored but he had trained himself to hear. And there it was again, that same dull, misplaced sound, not sharp enough to demand attention, not loud enough to trigger alarm, but consistent, controlled, and deeply wrong in a way that couldn't be dismissed as chaos or coincidence. Behind him, the alley felt distant now, and when he glanced back for just a fraction of a second, he saw Amara Brooks still standing exactly where he had left her, small against the darkness, her eyes fixed on him with a steadiness that didn't belong to someone her age, as if she understood that whatever happened next depended entirely on what he chose to do in this moment, not what he had done before, not what people said about him, but this, right here, right now. Vincent turned back to the doorway, his expression unreadable, his posture unchanged, but something in the way he inhaled, slower this time, deeper, suggested that the decision he had been avoiding was no longer optional. "Stay back," he said, though he didn't know if he was speaking to his men, to Amara, or to himself, and then he stepped inside. The room wasn't large, maybe 12 feet across, cluttered in a way that spoke of survival rather than living, with furniture pushed aside, walls marked by time and neglect, and a single overhead bulb struggling to stay lit, flickering just enough to make everything feel unstable, uncertain, like the ground itself could shift without warning, and near the center of it all, there was movement. Not chaotic, not unpredictable, but contained in a way that made Vincent's focus sharpen immediately, his mind aligning with the precision that had defined every decision he had ever made. He didn't speak. He didn't announce himself. He simply stood there, taking in the scene, every detail catalogued, every angle measured, until something else cut through his analysis. Not a sound this time, but a presence low and grounded, closer to the floor, and when his gaze dropped just slightly, he saw her. A woman. Still. Not unconscious, not unaware, but quiet in a way that suggested something far more complex than fear, her breathing controlled, her body held together by something Vincent couldn't yet define, and for a brief moment, something unfamiliar flickered across his expression. Not recognition, not yet, but the beginning of it, the sense that this moment was connected to something beyond the alley, beyond the rain, beyond the decision he thought he had just made. And in that fragile space between observation and understanding, Vincent Hale realized he was no longer just witnessing a situation. He was standing inside a story that already knew his name. What does it take for a man who owns fear to finally feel something else? Vincent Hale didn't announce himself as he stepped fully into the room, but the air shifted anyway, subtle yet undeniable, as if the space itself recognized a different kind of presence had entered. One that didn't belong to peeling walls and flickering lights but to boardrooms, silence, and decisions that reshaped lives without ever raising a voice. And yet here he was, standing just inside the threshold, his gaze steady, his posture unchanged, while the scene in front of him refused to align with the order he was used to controlling. The man near the center of the room turned first, not startled, not afraid, just irritated at the interruption, like someone who believed the world outside that door had no authority over what happened inside it. And for a brief moment, Vincent saw it clearly. Not chaos, not desperation, but confidence, misplaced and dangerous, built on the assumption that no one would interfere. "You lost?" the man said, his tone casual, dismissive, as if Vincent were just another stranger who had wandered into the wrong place. And Vincent didn't answer right away, because answering would mean acknowledging the situation in terms he hadn't fully accepted yet. Instead, his attention shifted again, back to the woman on the floor, to the way she held herself. Not broken, not defeated, but contained, like someone who had learned how to endure rather than escape. And something about that stillness pressed harder against Vincent's thoughts than anything else in the room. Behind him, footsteps approached cautiously, one of his men stopping just outside the doorway, waiting for instruction that hadn't come yet, because Vincent hadn't decided what this was: intervention, obligation, or something else entirely. "You should leave," the man continued, his voice tightening slightly now, not out of fear, but control, like someone used to setting boundaries that others respected without question. And Vincent finally looked at him fully, really looked, not at the surface but through it, the way he always did when something mattered, measuring posture, tone, the subtle signals that revealed more than words ever could. This wasn't random. This wasn't isolated. This was practiced, structured. And that realization shifted something deeper than irritation. It shifted responsibility. Vincent took one step forward, slow, deliberate, the kind of movement that didn't threaten but didn't yield either, and the room seemed to contract around it, the flickering light catching the sharp lines of his face, the calm in his expression that had unsettled far more dangerous men than this. "You said someone sent you," Vincent said quietly, his voice even, controlled, but carrying just enough weight to change the tone of the room. And for the first time, the man hesitated. Not visibly, not enough for most to notice, but Vincent did, because hesitation was something he understood intimately. "I didn't say that," the man replied, but the correction came too quickly, too defensively, and Vincent's eyes narrowed just slightly. The smallest acknowledgement that the truth had already surfaced whether the man wanted it to or not. Somewhere behind him, from the edge of the doorway, Amara Brooks watched, silent, unmoving, her small figure framed by the dim light of the alley, her eyes locked on Vincent with that same quiet certainty, as if she had already decided what he would do long before he had admitted it to himself. And in that moment, Vincent realized something he hadn't expected. Not about the man in front of him, not about the room, but about the girl who had led him here. She hadn't just asked for help. She had chosen him. And now, standing in a place where his power meant something entirely different than it did anywhere else, Vincent Hale understood that walking away was no longer a decision he could make without consequence. In a rain-soaked American city where power usually walks past suffering without a second glance, a ruthless mafia boss is forced into an unexpected moment of reckoning when a desperate little black girl clutches his coat and begs for help, pulling him into a hidden world of silence, fear, and unspoken truths. This cinematic story blends tension, morality, and emotional depth with a gripping narrative that explores how control can turn into responsibility, how indifference can fracture under pressure, and how even the most untouchable figures can be confronted by innocence that refuses to let go. As the mafia boss steps deeper into a dim, confined space where authority feels strangely out of place, the line between observer and participant begins to blur, revealing a layered journey filled with dramatic irony, subtle psychological shifts, and a powerful emotional arc that defines true dark romance, where vulnerability collides with dominance in unexpected ways. The little black girl becomes the emotional anchor, silently guiding the story with unwavering belief, while the mafia boss confronts a reality that challenges everything he thought he controlled, creating a narrative tension that resonates with fans of dark romance who seek more than surface-level drama. Through carefully paced storytelling, atmospheric detail, and internal conflict, The story builds toward a profound realization that power without action is complicity, a theme deeply rooted in the essence of dark romance, as it reveals the fragile humanity beneath calculated strength. Viewers who are drawn to intense, character-driven storytelling will find themselves immersed in a world where every glance, every pause, and every decision carries weight, making this more than just a story. It is an emotional experience shaped by silence, choice, and consequence. This unforgettable journey captures the essence of dark romance by intertwining danger, empathy, and transformation, offering a narrative that lingers long after it ends. As the Mafia boss faces the cost of looking away, and the little black girl proves that even the smallest voice can reshape a powerful destiny, redefining what dark romance truly means in a modern cinematic storytelling landscape. What happens when a man who has never been questioned starts questioning himself for the first time? Vincent Hale didn't move immediately after the man's words faded into the dim air, but something inside him had already shifted beyond recognition, subtle yet irreversible, like a fault line cracking beneath a structure that had always appeared unshakable. And as he stood there, just a few feet away, the space between them felt heavier than the walls closing in around them, because this was no longer about interruption. It was about ownership, about control, about something Vincent had built, without ever needing to see its consequences this closely. The man in front of him adjusted his stance slightly, not retreating, not advancing, but holding his ground with a confidence that came from somewhere deeper than arrogance. Something learned, reinforced, protected, and Vincent recognized it instantly. Not the man, not his face, but the behavior, the pattern, the quiet assumption that certain actions carried no risk as long as the right names were attached to them. "You should leave," the man repeated, more firmly now, but there was a flicker beneath the surface, something less certain than before, because Vincent hadn't responded the way most people did. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't reacted emotionally, hadn't followed the expected script, and that alone was enough to unsettle the balance. Vincent tilted his head just slightly, studying him with a precision that stripped away everything superficial, leaving only what mattered. And when he spoke, his voice was lower this time, quieter, but far more dangerous in its calm. "Who told you that you could do this?" The question didn't echo, didn't demand, but it landed with a weight that shifted the air again, because it wasn't just about the situation in the room, it was about authority, about permission, about the invisible lines that dictated who could act and who couldn't. The man hesitated again, just a fraction longer this time, and Vincent saw it clearly now. The connection, the structure behind the behavior, the system that allowed this moment to exist at all. "You don't want to get involved," the man said finally, choosing his words carefully, and that was when Vincent understood. It wasn't defiance. It was confidence in protection. Behind him, from the doorway, Amara Brooks took a small step forward without realizing it. Her eyes fixed on Vincent, not the man, not the room, just him, as if she were waiting for something specific, something she had already decided he would do, and that expectation pressed harder against him than anything else in the room. Vincent didn't look back at her, but he felt it. The quiet insistence, the belief that he wouldn't walk away this time, and for a brief moment, something unfamiliar tightened in his chest, not discomfort, not fear, but something closer to accountability, a concept he had long avoided by staying above situations like this, by never stepping close enough to feel their weight. He took another step forward, closing the distance just enough to make the shift undeniable. And the man's posture changed again, not dramatically, but enough to signal that whatever control he thought he had was beginning to slip. Vincent's gaze didn't waver. "Say the name," he said quietly, and this time it wasn't a question. The room fell still in a way that felt deliberate, as if even the flickering light above had paused to listen, and for the first time since Vincent had entered, the man looked uncertain. Not about what was happening, but about what came next, because the rules he had been operating under were no longer holding, and somewhere behind all of it, Amara Brooks stood silently, watching the moment unfold, her small presence anchoring a decision that Vincent Hale could no longer avoid. A decision that would not just define what happened in this room, but what kind of man he would be when he walked out of it.